A staple card is a term for a card that's usable in pretty much every deck. So in this list we'll be going over the cards of the highest rarity in the game that are probably some of the best ones to craft, or they're just going to be useful in everything. And at number 10, we have Solemn Judgment. This is a counter trap card which has the effect where, if your opponent would summon a monster or activate a spell or trap card, you can pay half your life points to negate that thing and destroy the card. Now, paying half your life points seems like a steep cost for a card effect, but if the thing you need to negate was something that would have completely destroyed your board, like maybe a Harpy's Feather Duster, then that is a pretty cheap price to pay for not losing the game instantly. And that's kind of why Solemn Judgment is played, normally to protect back row cards from devastating cards, like Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm. And it's also just useful at stopping key summons, since if you're able to disrupt your opponent's plays, then you don't really care if you have half your life points missing. Your life points are a resource to be used, not something to be hoarded, as you only need one life point in order to win, and most decks don't really have burn damage, so you don't have to worry about being at a low life point value anyway. And also, since it's a counter trap card, most monster negates can't respond to it, so you can safely negate your opponent's stuff if they have a board of monster negates on the field, like a Borreload Savage Dragon or even Herald of Ultimateness. And at number 9, we have Effect Veiler. This is a level 1 tuner hand trap which has the effect where, during your opponent's main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard in order to negate the effects of one face of effect monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn, which does also carry over to the graveyard in some circumstances. So if your opponent tries to use the effect of Lone Fire Blossom under the effect of Effect Veiler, its effect will still be negated, even though they're no longer on the field. Now, Effect Veiler is kind of power crept by Infinite Impermanence, as it can kind of do the same thing, but Effect Veiler has seen a huge resurgence in popularity due to the effects of Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. Because outside of being a decent hand trap that can negate your opponent's effects, which is the name of the game in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's also just the perfect type for a pretty generic combo that's usable in a whole bunch of decks. Here's how the combo goes. If you have a way to go to Crystron Halqifibrax, which is a card that's played in a whole bunch of different kinds of combos, then you can use Crystron Halqifibrax in order to summon Effect Veiler from your deck. Then you can use those cards to go into Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians, who then gain spell counters equal to the amount of spells on the field and in the graveyards. And if it gained at least 3 spell counters, you can use its effect in order to special summon a spellcaster type monster from your hand or graveyard, which you use in order to bring back the Effect Veiler. Then use Effect Veiler and Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians to go into Accesscode Talker, with a 3 material link monster as one of its materials, giving it an extra 3000 attack points. So Effect Veiler is both useful as a hand trap and as a combo tool into going into Accesscode Talker, if you're able to get Crystron Halqifibrax on the field, which a lot of decks try to do with whatever engine they're running anyway. And at number 8, we have Lightning Storm. This is a going second card which can only be activated if you control no cards, where it allows you to choose one of its 2 effects to either destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls, or destroy all of your opponent's spell and trap cards. The reason something like Lightning Storm is played more than cards like Raigeki or even Harpy's Feather Duster is because it has the versatility of being able to choose one of those 2 effects to use, even if those other 2 cards can do the same thing but with less restrictions. And if a card is able to perform multiple tasks, which are all good, it's going to see infinitely more play than something that only specializes in one kind of thing. Kind of like why Effect Veiler saw a resurgence in play, because of its combo with Selene, Queen of the Master Magicians. And at number 7, we have Infinite Impermanence. This is a hand trap which can only be used during your opponent's turn as long as you have no cards on your side of the field, where it simply negates the effects of one monster until the end of the turn, just like Effect Veiler. And the reason this card is really good on a hand trap is because you can use it during your opponent's first turn in order to stop their combos, so they can't set up an unbreakable board of monsters, which is just infinitely more usable than having to set the card first and then wait an extra turn, where they might already have an established board where they can just destroy everything you're trying to do. However, if you do go the route of setting the card, it gains an additional effect where, if Infinite Impermanence is activated while it was set in the spell and trap card zone first, and you successfully negate the effect of a monster, it also goes on to negate the effects of all spell or trap cards in the column as the card until the end of the turn. Which means you can set Infinite Impermanence in the same column as one of your opponent's spell or trap cards, and use it as either a spell and trap card negate, or a monster negate just as long as you have a monster effect to negate on the field, because you have to negate the effect of a monster in order to activate its column's lockdown. And both of its effects are really good, and since it has this versatility, just like Lightning Storm, it's one of the more played hand traps in the game. And at number 6, we have Nibiru the Primal Being. This is a hand trap that can only be activated when your opponent has normal or special summoned 5 or more times this turn, where you contribute all face-up monsters in the field in order to summon a token to your opponent's side of the field and this card to your side of the field. So basically, it's a full board wipe during your opponent's turn when they're trying to set up combos, which can kind of win you the game on its own. However, the effect is completely useless against decks that don't combo, or don't summon more than 5 times per turn. So against the deck that it's usable against, it's one of the best cards in the game. Can completely win the game on its own, especially if you summon one 3 times in a duel against the virtual world player. If your opponent's not playing combo though, then it's a dead card in your hand that you're probably not going to get to use, which is why it's better used as a side deck option in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's still really good nonetheless at Master Duel, even though it does have these downsides. And at number 5, we have Forbidden Droplet. This is probably the best going second card in the game, because it has the ability to completely shut down all of your opponent's monster negates, without giving them a chance to respond to it or negate its effects, because it has the effect where, on a quick play spell card, you can send any number of cards in your hand or field to the graveyard to choose an equal number of effect monsters your opponent controls in order to cut their attacks in half, and negate their effects until the end of the turn. And your opponent is not allowed to respond to this card with other cards of the same types of cards you sent to the graveyard for its activation. So, for example, if you sent a monster card to the graveyard to activate its effect, your opponent is not allowed to activate a monster effect in response, and so on and so on. And just remember, since this is a quick play spell card, in order to kind of circumvent the cost a little bit, what you can do is activate the effect of a spell or trap card first, then just chain Forbidden Droplet to that card in order to send it to the graveyard, since most spell and traps don't need to be on the field in order to resolve their effects. So you can basically use this card for free if you just chain it in response to one of your own Monster Reborn or Upstart Goblins and then send that card to the graveyard because its effect will still resolve. Or any other search you have for whatever archetype you're playing. But most of the time you're using it, you're probably trying to negate one of your opponent's monster negates, so you probably want to send at least one monster from your hand to the graveyard as well. And Forbidden Droplet is really good if you're trying to out an unbeatable boss monster like Herald of Ultimateness, as they can't respond or negate Forbidden Droplet as long as you send a monster. And one of the advantages Forbidden Droplet has over other going second cards is that you can also set it and use it during your opponent's turn as a form of disruption as well. And at number 4, we have Accesscode Talker. This is a Link 4 monster that only requires 2+ effect monsters as materials, and has a whole bunch of effects that are basically designed in order to counter meta decks. Where, when this card is summoned, it gains 1,000 attack times the Link rating of one of its materials, which allows it to go into some really high attack power values and beat over any of your opponent's big boss monsters. A lot of unkillable boss monsters only have the weakness of being destroyed by battle. So if your opponent has something out like Ultimate Falcon, which is immune to all card effects and has a high attack power value, Accesscode Talker kinda makes quick work of it. It also has a whole bunch of spell speed 4 effects, where your opponent can't respond to anything it tries to do, as it has the effect where your opponent can't activate any cards or effects in response to this card's effects, which is important because it has another effect where you can banish a Link monster from your field or graveyard to destroy one card your opponent controls. And this effect is not once per turn and only has a restriction where you can only use one attribute of Link monster per banish. So if you banished a fire monster to use the effect, you can't banish another fire Link monster for the rest of the turn. And since your opponent can't respond to any of its effects, and more importantly, its destruction doesn't target, you don't have to worry about your opponent trying to negate its destruction. And since the name of the game in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is negating your opponent's effects, Accesscode Talker does a really good job of just responding to the effect negate meta by just ignoring it, and also ignoring cards that can't be targeted by card effects, while also being a big beat stick that can just destroy stuff really easily. And at number 3, we have Called by the Grave. This is a quick play spell card which has the effect where you can banish one monster from your opponent's graveyard in order to gain the effect where the effects of monsters of the same name are negated until the end of the turn. Which means you can use this card in order to stop your opponent's hand traps. You see, most hand traps send themselves from the hand to the graveyard as a cost, which means you can chain Called by the Grave to a hand trap in order to banish the card from the graveyard in order to retroactively negate the effect of the card as the chain resolves backwards. And since it just negates the effect of the monster's name for the rest of the turn, you don't have to worry about chain blocking, so it's one of the best ways to negate a monster's effect too. But be careful, because it also stops you from using cards with that monster's name for the rest of the turn too. So Called by the Grave is one of the best cards you can have if you're trying to go first instead of an unbeatable combo, because it's like an anti-hand trap card that can also be used during your opponent's turn as a form of disruption, because a lot of decks like to use the graveyard in order to set up their plays. And since it's useful both as an anti-hand trap card going first and just as a form of disruption on its own, it's one of the most played cards in the game, and currently semi-limited to 2 copies in Master Duel. And at number 2, we have Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This is another hand trap which has the effect where, if your opponent would move a card from their deck somewhere else, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard in order to negate that effect. And since most meta decks like to move cards from the deck somewhere else in order to accomplish their plays, by either searching out a card, sending it from the deck to the graveyard, or special summoning monsters directly from the deck, Ash Blossom hits pretty much one of the best types of effects in the game that is one of the most common as well. If you have Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in your hand, chances are you're going to be able to use it against pretty much any deck you're facing against. And Ash Blossom is so useful in so many decks that it's kind of a benchmark for a meta deck, where if your deck can't play through a single Ash Blossom negate, then it's probably not competitive. And at number 1, we have Maxx. This is a hand trap which has the effect where you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard in order to gain the effect, where for the rest of the turn, each time your opponent summons a monster, you get to draw 1 card. It does have a hard once per turn, so you can't stack up the effects, but basically, if you chain the effect in response to one of your opponent's cards that's about to summon something, you can guarantee to draw at least 1 card. And what makes this card very powerful is that in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, there are a lot of very powerful singular cards that can kind of win you the game on their own, like Nibiru the Primal Being or Lightning Storm. And because just a singular card is so powerful, being able to draw cards too easily is heavily restricted in the game. Which means if you drop a Maxx and your opponent's playing a combo deck, they know they pretty much have to stop summoning cards, otherwise they're just going to give you a whole bunch of card draw, which might have a whole bunch of really good going second cards that will just completely shut anything down they might put up anyway. All that to say, dropping Maxx on your opponent is basically like telling them that their turn is over now. And since you can do this without losing any card advantage, Maxx is one of the most powerful cards in the game for basically letting you skip your opponent's turn. And the fact that it's a generic hand trap means it's definitely usable in pretty much every deck. If you're trying to find a card to craft for every deck, you can't really find something better than 3 copies of Maxx, because it's literally just the best card in the game. It's currently banned in the TCG for being too powerful, but for some reason, unlimited in Master Duel, so you should definitely take advantage of it until it eventually gets banned there as well. Alright, and that's the list. I've now covered all of the best staples from all the rarities in the game. You can just go watch the previous videos if you want to know what those are. Do you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, or know of any cards that may have missed? If so, I'd love to hear about those things down in the comments.